Welcome in, everyone. You're listening to Bulls Central. The Bulls have just wrapped up day 2 of training camp, although I shouldn't say wrapped up. I think they do have another practice here, but they're in Nashville, and I figured what better way than to bring in one of the guys that's actually down there in person covering the team to recap the latest of training camp. You know him for all the great work he does over at CHGO. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the show, Will the Goat Gottlieb. Will, thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate you making the time.
Happy to be here. Yeah, happy to talk some Bulls. There's actual basketball happening now. It's not
Right?
just rumors and off-season smoke. There's a
Mhm.
team on a court playing basketball. I'm ready to actually see something happen.
There's actually stuff to talk about. That's what I like. If you're not already, be sure to give Will a follow at Twitter at Will_Gottlieb. Be sure to subscribe to the CHGO channel, as well as check out all of their great work that the guys have been doing over at CHGO. Big Dave, Matt Peck, as well as Mark K. If you guys want Bulls content, you can't get enough of it, these guys have it. I'll leave a link to all that in the description. So, Will, day 2 of practice just finished up. We'll obviously talk about the Bulls and what to expect for this upcoming season in a little bit. But after day 1, I feel like a lot of the talk was about the importance of the first week of training camp, being in Nashville, and the emphasis of it really being an opportunity for the guys to build cohesion, team building, team bonding, stronger relationships, all that stuff, which I actually think is great and we can talk about. But coming out of day 2, what were some of the takeaways thus far? What's the vibe? What are some of the things that the guys are working on in practice now? Has there been more of a focus on the actual basketball aspect of it rather than, the team building side of it?
Yeah, I think it's both. Like you kind of started talking about, the Nashville piece, I think is important for these guys. You before we started recording, just likened it to a company offsite, and I think that's a great comparison where, these guys like go to practice in the morning, they go work out, they ice, they do all their stuff, they go back to the gym, get some more shots up, get a lift in, and then they're exhausted and they go home to their family for dinner, and then they go to sleep because they're waking up at 6 or 7 in the morning the next day to go to practice again.
Right.
So this, like, I just don't think people quite understand the grind of this
Hmm.
job from a player's perspective. So all that to say, I do think coming here to Nashville, doing some team activities and team bonding stuff sounds a little bit corny, a little bit cliche, but I think it does have some gravity. And even yesterday, um, during his availability, DeMar was kind of saying, I hate doing training camp at home. Like they did it
Right.
sometimes in Toronto. He was like, we went to Hawaii, we went to Montreal. Like it's always been so much better. And, we get to know each other better. We get on the same page before the season starts about what we need. Billy was echoing the same stuff. And there was an article today in The Athletic about the 76ers who also were holding training camp. I can't remember exactly where it was, but
It's
it was not
Colorado.
in Philly, in Colorado. There you go.
Yeah.
And one of the quotes was that Nick Nurse was like, if I'm being honest, we also wanted to get away from the media a little bit. So they couldn't escape all of us, but I'm
Right.
sure that piece of it didn't hurt either.
And are you guys all staying at the same hotel room, including the reporters and everything?
No, we're kind of scattered across Nashville.
Okay.
Some people closer to the downtown area. I'm staying near Belmont University, which is where they're practicing. And
Right.
to answer
Right.
your original question, um, it's like focused on the offense this year and trying to figure out what exactly went wrong for a team that has 3 offense first players, 3 all-stars who have made a name and a living for themselves off of their offensive ability to end up 24th in offense. It's
Yeah.
crazy. I think they can't really believe it at times either. But the good news is, and I think what they've been working on is like this idea that you can't just say, let's do it better. Let's like the shots are going to go in this year. That's not how it's going to work.
Yeah.
They were third in field goal percentage, 11th or 12th in effective field goal percentage. This was not a case of just missing shots last year. Things need to actually change. And I think they're all kind of on board with that coming into camp, which is, if this were a new team, like we kind of talk about continuity and should they make some real changes. If this was a new team, you might not have that same perspective. But I
Right.
think to be all on the same page of there's stuff we actually need to fundamentally change about this, and let's go problem solve and figure some of that stuff out. I think that's a really good place to be for day 2 of training camp.
So let's talk about that a little bit more. At Media Day, I know you were there as well. AK and Billy, they were really emphasizing the need to play faster, more ball movement, changing their shooting profile, all stuff that we've heard really, throughout the offseason being talked about. Billy, after day one, I believe, mentioned the guys were working on that, but the execution wasn't there just yet because it was the first day. Did you notice, some execution or a change in that going into the second practice? Are they now actually putting that into practice, and how's it been going so far?
Yeah, so the media does not actually get to watch any of the actual practices. We kind of get brought into the
So they
floor
bring you in after the fact.
just,
Okay.
while guys are shooting around a little bit. It would be amazing if we got to actually see what was going on behind closed doors, but information is power in this league, and
Right.
they are not, no team is really risking it like that. Even just like taking videos and putting them on Twitter could really kind of sabotage some of these teams. So all
Right.
that to say, don't know exactly what the execution looked like. I don't think Billy was saying that to say like things were really sloppy. I think it's more just like they want to implement a bunch of new things and it takes more than one day to figure that
Sure.
stuff out. So there was no like big group scrum today. I did get a chance to talk with Nikola Vucevic, and I just
Yeah.
posted a story on our website about that. But he is, I think, going to be really critical in sort of changing not just the shot profile, but the usage distribution and how and where guys get touches and generating easier and open looks, whether it's, coming off of screens or just spot up threes. Like they need to find ways to get out of the mud with this team and this offense. And I think learning how to let Vooch be the fulcrum that takes you from point B to point C, not necessarily being the offensive initiator, but the guy that kind of keeps the advantage alive, that makes the next play. I think he's going to be really critical to that. And it seems like everybody is kind of on board in that area as well.
So I wanted to talk to you about that as well because I saw just shortly before we joined that you actually had talked to Vucevic today, and I haven't had a chance to look at the article you put out. In media day, as well as both, what AK and Billy have been talking about is the need to run the ball and utilize Vucevic more, potentially utilizing him as a playmaker, a point center, if you want to call it that, right? Uh, how do you envision that working within the overall offense? Have they talked about it when you talked to Vooch specifically? He probably didn't mention anything, but have they actually started running some of that in practice and what that would potentially look like?
Yeah, I think they're getting into it a little bit. Obviously, they're not going to tip their hand and show their whole playbook, but I
Right.
think the idea is, can we get there's your general like dribble weave or just bring the ball up and get into sort of a 21 offense, which is kind of how they typically initiate coming in from the wing, entering it either into the paint, into the corner or into the paint, and then running off of there. And I think what they're going to try to do is continue on with that stuff. But when the initial shot isn't there, or if, there's a closeout and that kind of halts things and slows things down. Last year it was, okay, find DeMar and just he'll go get you something now. Or there were even times when he would just grab a rebound, bring it up the court and get right into a post up. Like I think the idea is they're going to look for more whether it's different kinds of actions or just actions with more movement in them in general, they're going to start off possessions looking for more of that. And then if that gets squashed, which oftentimes it does, not just for the Bulls, but for any team, it's moving into the next play and keeping that advantage alive so that you're not just like bringing the ball back out, letting the defense reset, and then letting DeMar or Zach get into an isolation or pick and roll. And I think getting the ball into the middle of the floor where Vooch can be, dribble handoff guy,
Yeah.
or run some post splits and let him operate as a passer out of the post. I think that can just really open up some stuff and create easier looks. Like I said, whether it's cutting or just spot up threes, to where you're not just over relying on DeMar or Zach every single possession.
What were some of your bigger takeaways from the conversation you had with Vooch today?
Yeah, I just think he gets kind of maligned a lot in the media, and Joe Kelly wrote a great column about this yesterday, where people think he's like complaining about not getting touches, or
Right.
he's the one that sacrifices. Like this is not him complaining about getting the ball more. It's not like he thinks that his way is the best way. It's like, how do we as a team unlock the talent that we have? Because they do
Right.
have a lot of talent. I mean, they've
Yeah.
got three all stars. We kind of waffle on whether or not that's actually true, but like the NBA has this new player participation rule,
Yeah.
and
Based on
all
that
three of those
policy.
guys, based on those guys, all three, based on that policy, all three of those guys qualify as stars. They
Yeah.
have star players on this team, and they should be better than the 24th ranked offense. And I think for Vooch, it's like, how can I be a piece of that? How can I adapt my game to enhance the guys around me? Because the scoring is probably going to go down. I don't think he really cares about that, but it's like all these other things that can make life easier on DeMar and Zach, can make shots, more readily available for guys like Coby coming off of screens. I think he just wants to be more involved in that because I think he knows that the Bulls are going to get better looks if they play that way.
Yeah.
And so again, it was just like sort of getting a chance to actually talk with him about it. It's not, I want more touches. I'm the one that's sacrificing no more. I'm not letting that happen again. It's really just like, how can we as a group figure out what's best, and let's try this because we think it's going to work.
So switching gears just a little bit, not really related to training camp so much, but more so going into the season. I know you talked about it recently, but any additional rumblings on potential contract extensions for DeMar or Patrick Williams? And I'm kind of more focused specifically on Pat because we know that deadline to extend him is going to be coming up soon, right before the start of the season. Anything you're hearing around the beat about a potential extension for Pat?
Nothing from Patrick. It's a really interesting question. So, as you know, the new CBA this year now allows non-max 5-year
5
rookie
years.
extensions, right? So that could change a lot of things to where, does Patrick want to lock up a 5-year deal before he really has a chance to prove himself as more of a scorer type at a number that could look like a huge bargain for the team?
Right.
Maybe he wants to bet on himself, or maybe he wants to sign a shorter term deal where he gets some guaranteed money, but he's able to get back on to the free agent market a little bit sooner so that if he does get a chance to really prove himself as a scorer, he can then dip into that, source of money as a free agent. So my best guess, and this is speculation, is that we're probably not going to see anything before the deadline just because it doesn't really make sense for him. I think if the
Mhm.
Bulls could get him on a good number, they'd be thrilled to do so.
Yeah.
So not much news there. And then DeMar at media day, and I'm sure you saw this. He basically said like, I let my agent talk about it, and I tell him to leave me the hell alone. So
Yeah.
uh, I think he's in a tricky situation too. It's more similar to Vooch last year, where there is no deadline during the season. That deadline is going to be, I believe, June 30th of next year. So he can sign a contract at any point up until then. And maybe that happens now. Maybe, the Bulls are doing really well at the trade deadline. Maybe they want to lock him up. Maybe they're doing poorly and they want to trade him. And it makes
Right.
more sense to do that with an expiring contract. So I think they probably want to keep their flexibility there, to keep their options open, just because there is so much uncertainty about this team. I think everybody's confident and excited about this new season, but who knows what will happen.
Yeah, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that because I mean, from my perspective, I personally would be shocked if the Bulls actually do extend DeMar before the start of the season. I'm not saying that they're not going to extend him at all. I could easily see that happening towards the end of the year. But just given the uncertainty around this team, the fact that this could be, like Vucevic mentioned, the final year that they, have this go around, you have to see how the season sort of transpires before you extend someone like DeMar DeRozan at his age. Do you agree on that, or do you think that it would actually make more sense for the Bulls to try and lock them up since they are kind of pushing with this idea of continuity with this group?
This new CBA throws in so many wrinkles that it's like hard to really figure out, because I just think there's like precedents that haven't been set yet.
Right.
And especially with older players like DeMar, is if you're another team and you want to trade for DeMar, is it better to have him as an expiring contract
Mm.
where you don't know if he'll come back? Or is it
Right.
better to have some more certainty, hopefully at a lower number, where you can keep him on your books and maybe he's not going to be the long-term face of your franchise, but if you're a team that needs that secondary scorer, to get him on, more of a team control deal could be really appealing. So it's really hard to say just how teams view a guy like that compared to a guy like Zach, who obviously, you know, all the smoke this summer was that he's been in the rumor mill, but
Mm.
teams are a little wary of that $40 million a year.
Right.
So is it like a dollar after a certain dollar threshold, then you become a little bit more radioactive and teams don't want to deal with you even though you're locked up? Or
Right.
is it we only want to deal with expiring contracts to keep our cap books open? It's just kind of hard to tell at this point. But we've also seen teams like the Celtics, the Bucks, the Suns go all in without regard for long-term money. And so
Right.
there could be teams out there like that too. As they say, it only takes one asshole. You never know who's going to be that team that wants to come get a guy. But
Right.
I don't think it makes sense for probably either party to lock up anything longer term for DeMar at this point in the season.
Going back to Pat real quick, do you think that they will ultimately extend him, or he'll stick around? Whether that means they sign him before the start of the season, or he hits restricted free agency. Do you think that they'll ultimately want him back going into next season?
I think so. Since they turned over the roster, they haven't really gotten rid of any of their guys because they've been their
Hmm.
guys.
Right,
So,
right.
with the exception of Zach and Coby, everybody on this team is somebody that AK has brought in.
Hmm.
And Pat was that first one, right? He was the fourth draft pick in their first draft while, in the new regime. And I think that there's just so much they would be leaving so much on the table with him if they let him walk. So
Yeah.
they will, in my best guess, either try to extend him and lock him up before the deadline, or do something more similar to Coby, which is
Coby.
to say you give him a bag next summer before he gets to restricted free agency, rather than how they handled it with Lowry, which was, all right, you go out and let the market set your value, and we'll either match it and bring you back or try to work out a sign and trade. But we're not going to be the ones that decide how much you're worth.
Got it. Going back to camp real quick, I haven't seen it mentioned anywhere, and it's very possible I've just missed it through everything that's being put out, as it relates to training camp. Is Lonzo with the team? And is he actually participating in any basketball activities? I assume no on the basketball activities part, because that would be big news if that was the case, but I figured I would ask anyway. But is he at least there in Nashville with the team, doing some of these team building activities?
He is here in Nashville. I don't know what kind of activities he's been up to, but I know the team has been doing a lot of stuff last night, as I'm sure a lot of people saw on Instagram. They went to Top Golf.
Right.
Zach was showing off his set of clubs. They've got some other activities. I think they're going out for a steak dinner tonight. And I believe they are going at some point to talk with some folks with the Titans. So they'll
Oh,
hear
okay.
from their head coach, Mike Vrabel, and go check out the facilities there. So definitely trying to do some team bonding stuff. And I think Lonzo's a piece of that. He wants to be involved, but obviously not sure where he is in terms of, basketball activities, ramping up any of that. He did say he was halfway through his rehab. That was the quote from Media Day. So
Right.
I don't expect to hear much from him or from the coaches on him as we go through the season to just make sure that he's not under any pressure to try to get back. Obviously, they've already ruled him out, but just to really give him the time and space that he needs to recover.
Yeah, man, that makes sense. The reason I ask is because Casey shared an update after day one saying everyone had practiced. And that got me thinking, does that include Lonzo? I
No,
assume that's not the case, just everyone that's active on the
yeah, and we ask that every single day of practice. Did everyone practice? Is anybody injured?
right.
And typically the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is yes, except for Lonzo, of course.
Right, right, right. Well, that's good because I mean, you saw that, or maybe you didn't see, but Dame and Giannis were not active participants in practice today. I'm sure that's more just for resting. But it's good to hear that the Bulls, all the players are practicing. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and they're excited. I mean, yesterday they went almost 2.5 hours for their first practice,
Mhm.
and they haven't been monitoring the load or the amount of wear and tear yet. I mean, it's the first day, so they're not like worried about any of that stuff yet. It was just they were excited, they were ready to go, and so they went. And same thing today, almost 2 hours for the morning practice, which is kind of crazy when you consider they're doing another one tonight.
Right. I saw you share some video of Io and Kobe working on their handles in practice. What's the latest on the starting point guard spot battle? Are you getting a sense at all of who they might be leaning towards based on what you're seeing? I know you don't see all of practice, but you see guys warming up and things like that. Are you seeing anything in terms of like who potentially could be the front runner for that spot?
They're playing it so close to the vest that,
Yeah, I figured.
and I'm sure they don't even know, to be quite honest with you. Um, we asked Billy, is there a timetable for you to decide who's going to be starting at point guard and power forward? He
Hmm.
wouldn't commit to that. Obviously, he hasn't said who is going to be playing where. What I will say is that he's been very clear that whoever starts first is not necessarily going to be the starter all season.
Yeah.
I would expect, and we saw this last year in the preseason, Javante started a game, at power forward. Derek Jones started a game at power forward. Patrick Williams started a game at power forward. I think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see a lot of testing out different lineups. And I don't think that's a demotion for whoever gets moved in or out of the starting lineup. It's going to be more about enhancing that big three, those three stars and their skill sets rather than you're not as good a player as the guy behind you, so you're getting demoted. I think that's like a pretty important distinction. Obviously, a lot of guys want to start, they want to play, they want big minutes, they want the recognition, but ultimately this is about winning, and the best way to do that is to
Right.
enhance the skill sets of DeMar, Zach, and Vooch.
Right. And I mean, you kind of have to, right? There has to be an element of experimentation, with clearly what was working last season was not working. And so you have to
Exactly.
try out new rotations to see what could potentially work to actually get the most out of the big three. So I totally get that. If I had to ask though, who do you think will it be as far as who will be starting the point guard opening night?
I would say Javon Carter. I think they brought him in to be sort of that Patrick Beverly replacement. And
Yeah.
obviously, as soon as Beverly came, he was locked into that starting spot. We know what the Bulls look like when they have a really high level defender on the court next to Zach DeMar and Vooch. Whether Caruso starts at the four or not, like you really need that guy to be that lockdown point of attack, can get over screens and squash actions before they happen. I think Javon Carter is that guy more so than Io, as good as he has been defensively, and Coby. And then you factor in the shooting, and not just like the fact that he can shoot, the fact that he's hunting threes, that he's looking for every opportunity he can to fire away. He's a really confident guy, not to the point of arrogance, but I mean, he really believes in himself. He wants to get shots up, and the Bulls really need that. I mean, we're talking about
Yeah.
enhancing Zach DeMar and Vooch. The best way to do that is to give them space to operate. And I think Javon Carter's combination of offense with the shooting and defense with the point of attack playmaking, I think he represents the best complement to those guys.
How many threes do you think he's going to take per game this year for Javon Carter? I think what was like a little over four last season, but I imagine he's going to have the green light with the Bulls.
Yeah, so I'm just looking this up now. He averaged 4.2 last year in just 22 minutes a game. I believe Patrick Beverly played about 28 minutes a game with the Bulls last year. So,
Mm.
obviously Io's minutes took a hit, but he was still playing. Coby played a lot more after All-Star break. So I think there's going to be, some flexibility, I guess I'll say, in terms of how much these guys are playing. But I would imagine Javon Carter plays more than 22 minutes a game. And I would imagine he has the ultimate green light to get shots up. So I would say at least 5.5, maybe even more
Yeah.
than that.
The Bulls will need that. That's for sure. Uh,
Absolutely.
so Will, I know you got to run because you got your guys' show over at CHGO. So really appreciate you taking your time out of the busy day. I want to get you out of here on this one. Biggest surprise player for this upcoming season, good or bad?
In terms of who I expect to be a
Yeah,
surprise.
a player that maybe is going to exceed or maybe disappoint in terms of their overall expectations going into this year.
Yeah. I want to say, I don't want to say Patrick Williams, although I think that would be the answer for most people. But I think what would be interesting about that is it could go either way, right? I think a lot
Right.
of people want to see Patrick Williams turn into a 20-point a game guy. And I think a lot of people are just fed up with another high lottery pick that hasn't been able to produce as a big time scorer. Um, Patrick Williams kind of said this yesterday during his media availability. Like, I'm proud of the development that I've made, and I couldn't be more in agreement with him. The fact that he has become a super reliable 3-and-D big wing who can shoot over 40%
Yeah.
on a decent volume of threes, who can block a shot and get a steal per game. There aren't a lot of guys that can do that.
Mhm.
Certainly not very many who are 22 years old and hyper athletic. So I think that Patrick will continue to progress and grow. I think he'll probably end up winning out that starting four job. Not sure if he'll be in the closing groups, but I just think he'll continue to improve. I think it's clear to him that he's got more room to grow, but ultimately it's going to be about winning. He said that over and over yesterday. It's about winning. Winning will take care of everything. It sounded just like Jimmy Butler, but I really think that in order for the Bulls to win, he's got to be a little bit more dynamic scoring the ball. And at a certain point, he has to realize that, like, it's not just about Patrick, do you have these skills? It's Patrick, you need to apply these skills to help the
Right.
Bulls win, because that's ultimately your goal.
I know I said it was the last question, but how many wins? How many wins you got this team for this year?
Uh, It's tough. I think the over under is set at 37. So I'm not
Mm,
sure if that's still what it is. I definitely would take the over on that. I would probably say 42 or 43. I think they got better this offseason. I think they're going to look a lot more the way that they did in the second half of last year. But they still had some bad losses in that time and obviously
right.
couldn't end up making the playoffs, but had some close wins against teams like the Pistons and had some bad losses against teams like the Hawks. I
Hmm.
don't think they are going to be world beaters. I don't think they're going to have that, 15 and 10 type of record all year, but I do think they're going to be better. And so I'll go like 42, 43 wins.
Okay. I've got them a little higher. I've been predicting around 45, which I know is a bit
Not
optimistic.
out of the picture. Not out of the
Yeah,
picture
I
for
mean the
sure.
way I look at it, like you said, it's they had a lot of close losses last year. You add the guys that are needed for a little bit of added shooting. I'm not saying that, Carter and Craig are suddenly going to turn this team around with their shooting because yeah, they shoot it at a decent clip, but not at the highest volume, right? They're role players after all. But I do think that you're going to see a shift in the overall offense based on what they're trying to do right now in training camp. And if you can turn around some of those close losses that they had last year into wins, then maybe 45 won't be hard to get to. I'm not going to go,
Yeah.
50 plus like some people are saying, the super optimistic Bulls fans, but I mean 45 maybe not out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah. Javon Carter said that at his media day availability as well. It's like, just
Yeah.
bringing me in is not going to change the shot profile.
Yeah.
Clearly, everyone from top to bottom understands they need to play a different way and they need to execute that new style at a higher level. And I think it's going to be more than just one person who really helps jack up that 3 point attempt rate. And I think they can do it. And so I definitely am more optimistic about this season than, I would have been pre Javon Carter, pre Torrey Craig signings. And I think those guys really help just reorient, even if you turn the ship like 2 degrees, after a certain point, you're going to end up in a totally different direction. So I think there's going to be some of that at play as well.
Sounds good. Well, Will, again, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to meet with me over at camp. Means a lot. Go get on your show. I'll be there watching. If you guys are tuning in right now, make sure you go check it out if you haven't already. So yeah, Will, enjoy the rest of training camp. Best of luck going into the season and keep up the great work, man.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on. Always great to talk with you.